Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, and I'm here today in my guise as a light bringer to welcome you in to Aquarius season, whereupon I will rain my Uranian bounty upon you, proffering you telescopes, bizarre occultic diagrams, and the wonderful illumination of the nascent awareness of far-off worlds. So I'm primarily interested in exploring the concept of the sign of Aquarius being a visionary. To be a visionary is to be a midwife, to be impossible, to be a prophet, to have an awareness of far off things that are nestled tantalizingly in the future, and to be the person who says, look, that is something that could happen. That is something that I could raise your awareness of and help to hopefully bring in to a future age. I always say that with the succession of each of the zodiacal signs, the energies contained therein are meant to correct and act as a kind of medicine or antidote to the extremities of what went before. And with Capricorn and Aquarius nestled side by side, it is the unruly friction between finity and infinity. Capricorn, at its worst, is the never-ending winter. The world, when it has reached its utmost point of absolute unfruitfulness, where everything is barren, cold, and desolate, devoured by ice, where it seems like light will never come again. Everything has become corrupt and decayed and demoralized. And, the Capricornian ethos is to have the strength and the fortitude of character to exist within the most unprosperous of times and still find a way to survive, to prosper, to endure, to take the hardship without and metamorphose that into this ironclad hardness within, this iron will that will survive at all costs, which will develop those long keratinous horns and keratinous hooves that can climb any mountain. But like I said, when a sign is approaching the end of it, that is when you see the worst aspects of it. And the worst aspects of that Capricornian struggle is the belief that things will never get better, and therefore we always have to preserve and protect ourselves against the worst happening. It's this belief that the world is finite, that things will never get better, so there's no point actually trying to improve our lot in life. All we can do is just hustle and do the best we can, very stoically, with the very unwelcome circumstances in which we find ourselves. But if the denizens of Winterland, who are trapped there, frozen in the ice, disbelieve the rebirth of spring, then Aquarius comes along as its herald. He sees that it now being a month onwards from the winter solstice, that the sun is discernibly higher in the sky, offering more light, gradually elongating the elasticity of the days. He sees the bulbs, the snowdrops beginning to emerge, the daffodils, the crocuses and cyclamen. He hears on those especially sunny days the missel thrush and the blackbirds tentatively singing their song, rehearsing for the final opulence and emergence of spring in the coming equinox. He is the herald and the seer of all of these things, and realizes that there is more to come. He sees the world that is to come, where there are little symptoms of its coming, but it's not quite yet here. And to be caught in that interzone between definite seasons is an odd mix. Because if you see something coming, if you see a future that is bringing this mad resurgence of light into the world when everyone else is still addicted to the darkness, naturally you will be seen as being crazy, which is why Aquarians have a reputation for eccentricity. They are so future-minded that they can't help but be a symbol of dissonance to those who are attached to the present. They are rather, and that's because in their minds, Aquarians don't really occupy the same world as the rest of us. They occupy the world of infinite possibilities. So if Capricorn is solely focused on what could actually practically happen on a real world day-to-day level, Aquarius isn't interested in that. It wants to explore all the infinities of the cosmos. It wants to entertain all those crazy ideas that we usually put to one side as being impractical, because an impractical idea is only impractical if we haven't yet discovered the right way to bring it into being. But once we've had that insight, once we've devised that new technology or had the wonderful Uranian breakthrough that can see how to make these happen, then the world can change, you know? Many things are impossible until the right technology is involved. All these things seem like crazy pipe dreams until someone actually makes them happen and turns them into this solid reality, and then changes things for the rest of us forevermore, who are willing to say, I'm not happy just staying within those Capricornian frontiers and boundaries. I'm going to go beyond the rules. I'm going to go beyond the systems. I'm going to go beyond all of these frustrating little boxes and barriers we build around ourselves, certainly out of tradition and fear of what might be beyond. And I'm gonna search and see and just try and approach whatever strange things I encounter, whatever wonders or miracles come my way, with an intelligent and inquiring mind. Now, it's a very odd thing to either experience Sun in Aquarius or to be someone who is natally born with Sun in Aquarius, because in medieval astrology, the Sun was considered to be in its fall in Aquarius, whereas when the Sun is placed in Leo and the self is able to be at its most unapologetically flamboyant and extravagant, in Aquarius, the concept of self becomes a very expansive and murky one. I feel like the true Aquarian doesn't experience themselves as being a single confined individual so much as a cluster of infinite possibilities. And part of the Aquarian identity is to want to construct a lifestyle in which they have the freedom to explore all of those different possibilities, to entertain the multiplicities within, rather than just saying, I am this fixed single entity and I was born this way and I will end this way. It's this constant experimentation of, okay, I recognize that this person exists in me. Let's try that out for a while. Oh, that type of person exists as well. Let's try that. So it's almost like the very concept of having an ego and an identity is almost like this scientific research role, this anthropological experiment of what it is like to entertain a specific individuality, which is a concept that has always been very close to me because I have Aquarius rising. So that energy it dominates my outlook and has done from my earliest years. And you often find with very Aquarian people, they're very hard to pin down because they commit totally just to being one thing forevermore. They have put too many barriers around themselves and they've limited the rest of infinity that they could still explore. So there always has to be a possibility of an experiment coming to an end. There always has to be an escape hatch or the possibility of a revolution so that future change or illumination or breakthrough can be sought again. You know, one enlightenment isn't enough. There is always the desire for more illumination, for more wisdom, for more breakthroughs, for more shattering concepts that will continue to expand life instead of reducing it. And I feel like one of the popular culture figures who embodies this concept very nicely of the refusal of the Aquarian personality to be pinned down to having just one personality is David Bowie, who, even though he had Capricorn in the 12th Capricorn Sun, I believe in the 12th house off the top of my head, he had Aquarius rising. And of course, he was known as the great chameleon of pop, as this figure who refused to be just one thing. You know, whereas other pop stars and rock stars found their sound and stuck with it doggedly to the end of their careers, even if it went out of fashion, he kept changing with the time, finding new roles, finding new archetypes and avatars and personalities to occupy, from Ziggy Stardust to the Thin White Duke to the wonderful experimental electronic rock music he made in the 90s with the emergence of electronic genres and dance music. He was someone who flowed along with the threshold of change, who was always surfing the crest of development. Even with his final album, Black Star, he still managed to make something that was totally unlike anything that anyone had ever made before. This just genius epitaph, this flowering from beyond the grave. So you could say that with Sun in Aquarius, rather than just having one specific ego-bound consciousness, rather the consciousness becomes inseparable from the collective unconsciousness. There is this sense of all people living within you, and you being able to manifest all of those people depending on your whim or your mood. All of these things are different outfits that are intriguing to try on. These different masks that we can wear from day to day that can draw out and help to temporarily confine the infinity that lurks within us. And that idea of being a container for the infinite is even expressed in the very symbology of Aquarius itself, where Aquarius is the water bearer, holding in the urn or the ocean of possible experience. And this kind of this idea of being a water bearer is really interesting because the water is a symbol of the deep unconscious, of all that is mutable and changeable, of all that is infinite and strange, of our emotions. And Aquarius likes to be a container for those things, to explore the infinities of the conscious mind and of the universe and of its emotions, but from a detached perspective. It holds the water, but it also is afraid of getting too wet. And Sun in Aquarius has a complicated relationship with its emotions because it values clear-sightedness of intellect above all things. It is also very aware of how emotions can clog and distort the lens of our vision. And therefore, it's always seeking this detachment, this dispassion, this ability to put its emotions to one side, or even just look at them through a microscope rather than actually experiencing them, because then that makes that scientific mind too subjective. Then it wants to maintain its objectivity. And yet, in spite of this, Sun Aquarians can still be very, very emotional people, incredibly emotional people. It's just the barrier between feeling something but also not wanting to identify with that emotion, because that emotion feels too personal, too ego-bound, and it wants to be breaking beyond the limits of those things. And as a result, Aquarian people can sometimes often have this eccentric or erratic, but also very composed and cool demeanor that seems like it is always in control and never upset by its emotions, until suddenly out of nowhere, after having been icy cool for months at a time, it can have these sudden outbursts where all that has been held back, all which has been unlived and unfelt, is crying out for that expression, crying out for form. All of that buried stagnant water needs to have that release, needs to have that purgation, which we encounter more fully in the waters of Pisces, but we will get there when we get there. But to be a visionary is a very uncomfortable thing because it automatically sets you apart from other people. You may have all these wonderful ideas and insights that are all dedicated in some way to the betterment of humanity, to pulling humanity out of the suffering in which the current conditions and limitations of life are restraining it, and to say, look, if we all changed in this way, if we instituted these new rules, if we changed politics in this way, if we embrace these technologies, if we embrace these concepts and philosophies, then the world would be a better place for all of us. But in a world that is inherently resistant to change, which views anyone trying to change things as a troublemaker, you find yourself fighting for the betterment of humanity and humanity fighting against you for that very role. And there is that weird feeling I feel with very Aquarian people of somehow embodying every man and every woman and every being within them, and yet also being somehow separate from all of those people at the same time, of there being this icy wall that somehow separates you from others. And as I've said in my Venus and Aquarius video, Aquarian people often don't particularly experience themselves as being human because they have so detached themselves from identification with ordinary human emotions, which they see as reducing their potential genius, but then their identification with all of these crazy concepts that most people never entertain, except perhaps temporarily when they're watching a bad sci-fi movie. Um, their solar consciousness is existing in a very different place to other people. What they care about, what matters to them, is so far removed from other people that they might as well be different species. And so hence the Aquarian feeling of being an alien, of being an off-worlder, of being someone who's just been dumped on this planet as part of some kind of crazy research project. They almost remind me of angels, and by that I do not mean the kind of very moral, holier than thou seraphim, but the idea of this being that is a mediary in some way. It's not divine, it's not God, but it's also not human either. It's this demi being, this in-between being, this thing with this lofty vision and ideals that is walking among us, but is also not of us at the same time. And that can be a very elevating experience, because individuality and being a symbol of individuality at its most unrepentant is a very important concept to Aquarians. And yet being such an individual also means you lack the sense of community spirit that so many others can really love and find solace in. You can't just be an ordinary person who can take that comfort and safety in numbers, knowing that they're watching the same soap operas as everyone else and listening to the same radio stations and caught up in the same pieces of media. You know that you are different from that you are isolated from that, and yet also inextricably a part of that. And that's a very strange neurosis to live with at all times. And that kind of dissonance between being a human and yet also conscious of going through the motions of performing humanity, I think is one of the reasons why Aquarians so often, or very Aquarian people so often, come across as being absent-minded, because there's that one part of them that is looking outward, which is trying to engage with the world, that is trying to, maintain some kind of humanity and human connection with others, even if just for the sake of survival. And there's that other eye sloping into the background, contemplating all these crazy ideas and various hypotheses and notions that are really much closer to what it cares about. I mean, again, with my Aquarius rising, this is something I can really relate to. When in social situations, there's one part of me that is engaging with that other person, asking questions, being involved, hopefully being charming and hilarious and beautiful and lovely to be around. But there's also that other part of me, the astrologer, the psychologist, who is always thinking about the person I am with as being part of the great astrological experiment, as being someone I can derive more data and information from. Everything is research. There is nothing, no matter how small or banal, that cannot be potentially mined for new fruits of truth. And I think that's another part of the Aquarian perspective, is to want to look at something very ordinary and to find the strange in it, and to find the weird in it. And when you do not feel yourself to be an ordinary human being, you can look at things that other people take for granted and say, actually, that is weird. Where did that come from? Where did that custom come from? Where did that tradition come from? Why do we do this and not that? We can see how arbitrary and odd and devolved so much of human behavior is, and we want to question it and challenge it. And again, why Aquarian people often ask unusual questions, because they refuse to take these things for granted, because they realize that behind that banality, with a different perspective, a whole goldmine of potential quantum knowledge is lurking. And there are so many great Aquarian geniuses we can look upon. Mozart is probably one of the first who springs to mind. And while we may take his genius and the lovely tunefulness of his harmonies and melodicism for granted now, back when he was making music, even though he was recognized as a prodigy, he wasn't universally liked. There were many people who found his music too complex, too dissonant, too radical, too much going against the grain of what was accepted as normal at the time. And then you have James Joyce, the writer of Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses, who took the concept of the novel and then blew it to smithereens in a million impossible directions. revolutions with Aquarians do not happen by an incremental progressive approach, but with sudden leaps that start somewhere and then just seem to teleport somewhere else. And so it is with the Aquarian mind. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. I really enjoyed that. Really enjoy those energies. If you have any questions, if you have any experiences you want to share yourself or other things you'd like me to talk about, please leave a message in the comments section below. As Sun in Aquarius goes further along and squares Uranus and later comes into conjunction with Saturn, I will be doing videos on those as well. But for now, I will bid you adieu and say I hope you enjoy those blossoming Aquarian stellar energies, and you will be hearing from me again very soon.